So dear audience, dear ladies and gentlemen, we are starting with our third session today, which is going to be the shortest one with only one paper, because Johnny Jacobsen had to cancel. And so I will give the word to Stefan Pajung, who has studied in the University of Aarhus and now works at the Museum of National History of Denmark at Frederiksborg Castle, and has studied medieval commerce, cultural exchange, but also drinking culture and death. And now he has gone over to studying church history. So please, Stefan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mikko. While the coming of Christianity, the mission among the peoples of Livonia, the establishment of church structures in the newly conquered lands, because they were actually more or less conquered by people from the outside, and the significance of the church in all aspects of medieval society in Livonia has attracted significant interest from scholars working with the region and the history of the region. The interaction of the early Estonian church with the church structures of Denmark and the political structures of Denmark, they have attracted far less attention. This may be due because of all the German Baltic historians who had an interest into downplaying the Danish interest in the involvement in the region, or it may be because the Danish historiographer, I can't spell it. What you know what I mean? The tradition of Danish historians that they wouldn't work with Livonia because it was just outside their focus. So it was very, very rarely actually accentuated, and actually people got involved in writing on medieval Livonia, medieval Estonia, until maybe 30 years ago. Kurt was one of the first who actually started getting an interest going into the area again, and now it's again slowly declining. But just to show you how much interest there was in medieval Estonia, the church in medieval Estonia, is this map over the Danish dioceses in the Middle Ages. But where is the diocese of Reval? It's not present. So they even put the diocese of Visby after the medieval period on the map, but Reval isn't there. This is quite telling that this is so. But the only work on the subject that I actually have been, while I've been studying this, is a short article by Paul Rebane in the Journal of Medieval Studies, of Baltic Studies, from the 1970s, where he wrote on the Danish bishops of Tallinn. And since then, I think a couple of more sources have been published and have been accessible to people, but still it's very, very little. It's the sources are neither as abundant or as telling as one could wish or hope for. So, and what even may have existed at one point in Denmark has more or less either burned, destroyed, been destroyed, or just gone missing. So we have very little sources in Denmark as well. So this makes this subject quite hard to write on. But with these caveats in mind, these huge caveats in mind, I will still try to attempt to actually give an insight into what we know about the interaction between the church in Danish Estonia and Denmark, primarily in the period 1219 to 1346. That is the Danish period of rule over northern Estonia. but I will also work on a little bit on the time afterwards. Yeah, and this is in terms of personal interaction and Estonian influence in matters concerning both the Danish church and the Danish realm as a whole. So, well, the earliest Danish effort, earliest Danish missionary effort that we know of, is Archbishop Eskild's appointment of the French monk Folko. And this is in the 1160s. He was appointed Bishop of Estonia, and then we don't know how long he went, how often, how long he was in Estonia, and what he accomplished here. But he did go to Estonia, but we don't know what came of it. And afterwards, when he went back to Denmark and then to France, we don't know of any successor to Folko who was appointed by the Danish Archbishop. So we have a period where there's murk. It's not just mist, it is murk. It's darkness. It's utter darkness. It's only in 1219, when King Valdemar II of Denmark conquered northern Estonia, that we know of another one. And that was Theodoric. And you have all heard of Theodoric. Theodoric was appointed Bishop of Estonia by Bishop Albert of Riga in 1211. But he came with Albert to Denmark to the meeting which Kurt spoke of in 1218, and there he shifted his allegiances. So he did shift his allegiances from Albert and the Church of Riga to actually the Danish, so to the Danes. And so he went with the Danes to Estonia to become the first bishop there. Or so it was planned, because Theodoric was so unfortunate that his head ran into a sword or a spear or something very sharp by an Estonian. So he was killed during the Battle of Lundanise. So the Danes had to find a new bishop. And this was the Danish king's chaplain, Vesely. He was appointed Bishop of Revalia. And also they created the Danish priest Osred as the Bishop of Veronia in Järve. But they did not stay. And you can see Veronia, Nicole.
It's there next to the computer under your page. On the sheet.
Oh. Revalia was here, and then the other one was this area. And this was supposed to be two separate bishoprics, which was under the control of the Danish Archbishop of Lund. But then this first Danish attempt of creating an ecclesiastical structure and actually start to build up a bishopric and actually start the Estonian church in northern Estonia with all its institutions associated with a normal bishopric, it more or less crumbled into dust. We don't know very much about it because the Great Estonian Rising of 1222, 1223 and so on, and subsequent the Teutonic Order's occupation of the Duchy of Estonia. So they drove Vesely and Osred out of the bishopric. We know this from a few sources. Bunge wrote in his book on Weihbischof that Vesely went to Germany, where he worked a couple of years, but then disappeared. He probably died. And Osred is just, we don't know what happened to him. Probably maybe he was killed, maybe he just left for Denmark. We don't know what happened to him. But our knowledge is very, very sketchy on this first period. And I would have liked to ask my colleague Johnny Jacobsen, who was supposed to be here, about this. There was a possibility that there was created a monastery in Reval in 1229. But Some people say this is a mistake for 1239. This would be more appropriate, but we don't know what happened there. We have a single source on this, but we don't know anything about it more than that. This monastery was re-established in 1246. So, the reason why the Danes did not resist the Teutonic Order's takeover of northern Estonia is what Kurt already told us, because King Valdemar was imprisoned. Because his unfaithful vassal, Henry of Schwerin, put him in a dungeon and then locked him up, and the Danes didn't know what to do. So, for a couple of years, the Teutonic Order ruled, or controlled, at least controlled northern Estonia, and only in 1238, with the Treaty of Stensby, King Valdemar regained control over northern Estonia and could re-establish the Danish mission, or the church effort in the region. Good. Good. Well, one of the first steps was to actually name a bishop, a new bishop of Reval. And this time, Reval was to be responsible for the entirety of Danish Estonia. So the bishopric of Veronia was out. It was not re-established. And this posed some problems, because in the 1250s, Albert Zurbia, who had been named bishop of, let me get this right, Prussia, Livonia and Estonia by the Pope, actually laid claim to this area. Oh. This claim ultimately was unsuccessful, but caused some problems for the Archbishop of Lund, and he had to write the Pope. And the Pope said, "Oh, I made a mistake. Oh, we have to redo it." And he continued to lay claim to Rionia all his life until he died. But Torquil and his successors, and there were quite a number of them, as you can see here, they were supposed to be suffragans under the Church of Lund, under the Archbishop of Lund. And this practice continued even after northern Estonia, or the Duchy of Estonia, was sold to the Teutonic Order in 1346. But as Bishop of Reval, the Bishop of Reval was a Danish bishop. And as such, he had a role to fulfill. He had the obligation to actually participate in the synods of the Danish Church, to actually attend the church meetings that were held very, very infrequently. But he still had to attend to them, and then he had actually the role of royal counselor, because all the Danish bishops were automatically member of the royal council. So he would sometimes go from Estonia to the royal court and actually offer his advice to the king. Well, okay. These are the synods of the Danish Church in the Middle Ages that we know of. There are 5 of them. And so, as I said, the Bishop of Reval was supposed to be there every time he was absent. He was never there. And this can maybe be excused because mostly those synods were held during the winter or early spring. And you know, traveling from Estonia to Denmark at this time of year by seaway or by boat is not possible. So those examples, there he can be excused. But there are others which were not held there at this time, but they were held during summer. And he did not even send a representative. And in 1425, at a time when Estonia had been sold to the Teutonic Order, but Reval still was a suffragan under the Archbishop of Lund, the Bishop of Reval was again invited, and they specifically noted he did not turn up, and we are very angry at him, and we write a protest. And but he just said, I have way more interest in what's going on in Livonia. I would attend to meetings here, so be it. But supposedly he was supposed to be in Denmark, but as you can see, he never went. On the other hand, he went to Royal Council meetings. And what did he do there? Well, he gave counsel primarily on subjects concerning Estonia. So he concerned, it was supposed to be tithe payments, the privileges for the vassals, for the towns, for the monasteries. He was supposed to for the monasteries, or he was involved in planning a new crusade, because the crusade did not stop. There was this crusade in 1219, but there were still actually plans going on to continue the crusade in the Baltic after 1219, but it never got underway. But still he was involved in the planning. But this is primarily going on during the reign of the early bishops of Tallinn, of Reval, as we said. Later on, he was also used as a royal ambassador by the Danish king, because he was, the Danish king had to make a treaty with one of the Hanseatic towns, and it has to do with trade. And Reval was interested in that trade, then maybe it would be fine if the bishop of Reval was going, because he knew what was going on, and maybe he could even get some pointers from his backland in the Duchy of Estonia. Also, we can see that he also increasingly was used by the royal vassals of Estonia as a middleman, because he is a constant member of the Royal Council, so he has always access to the king. He doesn't have to wait, he can always go to him and tell him what is going on in Estonia, what problems do we have, are we under attack, we need support, and so on and so forth. So the vassals, of course, have an interest into getting into contact with the Danish king. He cannot just ignore them, so he actually is good to have on your side, and then we send him. We just need one representative, we send the bishop. This is good. But to fulfill this role, the bishops traveled infrequently to Denmark. As you can see, Torgil, the first bishop, was in Denmark at least 7 times. This may because Estonia still needs to be established, the church in Estonia still needs to be established, and all kinds of things that have to be consulted with the king. And then it decreases in frequency, but they still are in Denmark a couple of times. But there are also instances where the bishops of Reval just stay in Denmark. And the most extreme example of this is the first bishop who was not elected or appointed by the king or elected in Estonia, and that is Heinrich. And Heinrich is a curious case, because Heinrich was a papal aide, and the church of Reval, or the chapter of Reval, wanted to have one of its members appointed, but he died while he was in Rome to get consecrated. So the Pope said, well, who do we pick? We pick one of my aides, because he is a good man, he can do the job. And that was Heinrich. And Heinrich, of course, he accepted said, oh, fine, I will become bishop. Yay, I go to Estonia, yay, you be. But the problem is, he actually came to Denmark, and the king welcomed him and said, yeah, well, there's a conflict between me and the archbishop. I need a mediator. Would you like to take over? So he had to act as mediator between the king and the archbishop, Jens Gran. And he did such a good job to mediating that both the king, the pope, and the archbishop approved of this job. So he did a really good effort. The pope approved so much of his efforts that he even lifted the interdict which the Duchy of Estonia had been put under because of this conflict between the king and the archbishop 2 years ahead of the rest of Denmark. So Estonia, the interdict of Estonia was lifted in 1301, and the rest of Denmark, it was only lifted in 1303. So he was quite effective. But only then, he left for Estonia from Denmark in 1305, 7 years after being elected. Estonia had been without a bishop for 9 years. So now he went back to Reval, and he stayed there. We don't know of any instances when he left Estonia ever again, and he just managed his bishopric. But he never came back to Denmark. He didn't need to consult with the Danish king. He just stayed. This is fine. But eventually, after 5 years of vacancy, Oluf was appointed as Bishop of Reval. And he would be the last Danish bishop of Reval, but he had the problem that he went to Denmark twice, as you can see, in 1228 and 1328 and 1329, and there he had to use his influence to get the king not to sell Estonia. He said, "Don't sell Estonia. You can't do that because we are your loyal vassals. You can't sell it." And Christopher eventually said, "Yeah, you have good arguments, but I still need the money, so I sell it." So this was in vain, but he still managed to get some privileges for the royal vassals of Estonia from Christopher II. After 1332 and 1333, Oluf was on his own. He tried to hold the Duchy of Estonia for the Danish crown as Denmark was without a king. Christopher II had died in 1332 at the moment where he had pawned all of Denmark except the small island of Lolland. Here was nothing left. He was bankrupt. The Danish monarchy had no money, and all of the country was pawned, and they couldn't elect a new king. So there was in 1333, the Danish viceroy of Estonia stepped down and said, "I have nothing to. My king is dead. I have no job here. I leave." So he was the only one still in control, trying to hold the Duchy of Estonia for the Danish crown, and eventually King Christopher II's sons. Well, he did a good enough job, but in 1343, the Teutonic Order, as we all know, St. George Knights Rising and all that, he actually had to, together with other nobles of Northern Estonia, had to come out and publicly approve of the Teutonic Order taking over the duchy in order to defend it against the rebels. It was not the precise conditions of this approval is still debated, but he continued after the Duchy of Estonia was sold in 1346 to Teutonic Order, and he continued as Bishop of Reval until 1350. Well, apart from the bishops of Reval, there's quite other notable ecclesiastical figures from Livonia who actually make an impact in Denmark. And the first one was Heinrich. The first one was Nicholas of Dorpat. And Nicholas of Dorpat is a curious case because he is, of course, the Prince Bishop of Dorpat and so on, and independent, and he has quite a good relationship with the surrounding neighbors, either both the Teutonic Order and the Duchy of Estonia. But on the other hand, he has the threat of the Russian princes, the princes of Pskov, Novgorod, and so on, and he doesn't know if they will come and take over his bishopric, or the local Estonians will make another uprising. And does he have support? So he says, well, this is a quite precarious situation. So he goes to Denmark, and he comes into contact with the Bishop of Schleswig. And he tells him, well, don't you want to swap bishoprics? Because we just can do this. You just go to Dorpat and I go to Schleswig, take over your bishopric, and then we are all good. And the Bishop of Schleswig says, wait a minute, I don't want to do this. Unless my king approves of this. Because if the king approves of this decision, then he would probably also support me, and then it would be no problem. But the king said nothing. So he was left without a deal. A few years later, Nicholas of Dorpat again went to Denmark, this time not to talk to the Bishop of Schleswig, but to talk to the king directly, because it's always good to have a new ally. So he said, well, don't you want one of your bishops to swap bishoprics with me, and so on. And he first went to Lübeck, then went to Denmark, but the problem was the year was 1319. And in 1319, King Eric VI died. And he had no son. All his sons had died. So who was going to succeed him? Well, probably his eldest brother, but he has to sign a really sharp coronation charter in order to actually get to take over the throne, because the nobility doesn't want a strong king, so they have him sign a strong coronation charter where he actually gives them all kinds of privileges. And on this privilege, or on this coronation charter, Bishop Nicholas's name appears, which is quite strange. He's not a Danish bishop, he is the Bishop of Dorpat, and he just says Nicholas, Bishop of Dorpat. Why is he there? Danish historians have wondered quite a lot. And well, this is not as surprising as one may actually think at the beginning, because most likely Bishop Nicholas was legally trained, and actually he was maybe the guarantee that this treaty or this document was signed according to all the legal rules and so on, and all the normal legal procedures. And as a member of the clergy, who was not Danish or had any involvement in Denmark or Estonia, he had nothing at stake. So he would be a trustworthy witness. But after that, Nicholas disappears again from Danish history. Another one, and this is a more illustrious case, under the rule of, is close to the story about Nicholas of Dorpat. It is John of Wesenberg. He was a cleric from Danish Estonia, and he at the time he wanted to have a good position, get a canonry in Dorpat. But the problem is the Bishop of Dorpat said no, we have somebody else for the position, you don't even have to apply. And Nicholas, John of Wesenberg, he was quite unhappy about this, so he started a feud against the bishopric of Dorpat. And he did not do this on his own. He asked his friends, his family from Danish Estonia, and said, come and be my helpers in this feud against the bishopric of Dorpat. And then he wrote to the Pope and said, well, I would like to be provost in Dorpat. Provost is the head of the cathedral chapter. He would be in charge of all the monks at the cathedral chapter. He would range just under the new bishop of Dorpat. And then the new bishop of Dorpat said, no, we don't like him. Neither do I, nor the members of the cathedral chapter. We protest, and so on and so on. And then they used their arguments why they don't want him. They said he was actually a man who had committed murder, ravaged the lands of the bishopric, and done all kinds of heinous crimes. So he was really a bad guy. This is not good. You can't have such a guy as provost in your bishopric. So the Pope said, okay, you're barred from this position. But Nicholas or John of Wesel just said, okay, I can't be provost in Dorpat, I get another job. And then he became canon in Reval, and shortly afterward he actually also got another canonry in Aarhus, my hometown. And there he got a canonry in 1321. At a time there was a former an elderly canon who had bequeathed his inheritance, Brother Dain, and he had bequeathed his inheritance to actually establish a new canonry. And he specifically wanted John of Wesenberg to take this office. John must have been known to Brother Dain, maybe they had studied together or they had met at some previous occasion, but he described John as being a sociable man, a modest man of good morals, of scholarly demeanor, but he's well versed in the ways of the world. Well, murder, crime, and all kinds of other heinous things. So yeah, but he was welcomed by Bishop Esker of Aarhus and said, you can welcome as canon, you can just start here. And afterwards, he may actually have stayed in Denmark because John was with the young Prince Valdemar, the later King Valdemar IV, the guy who sold Estonia to the Teutonic Order, in 1338 in Greifswald, at a meeting at the Hanseatic town, with the Hanseatic towns, where Valdemar tried to get the support of the Hanseatic towns in his struggle to regain the Danish throne. And he was accompanied by 3 clerics, the new bishop of Aarhus, and two canons, and one of them was John of Wesenberg. Interestingly, why was John of Wesenberg there? Well, John of Wesenberg would have, one of the biggest assets which Valdemar IV at the time had was he was still Duke of Estonia. And John would actually have known all about the conditions in Estonia, who is who, what is important, and so on. So he would have provided him with valuable advice and so on. And actually, in these negotiations with the Hanseatic towns, the problem is just after that we really don't know what happened to John of Wesenberg. He may have died before 1343, but we are not certain. So basically. John of Wesenberg disappears from our history here as well. But the young Prince Valdemar becomes the blossoming swan, becomes the new king, and afterwards he actually provides a number of Estonian clerics, and those come from Reval, the bishopric, the diocese of Reval, from Osilia, and from Dorpat. He actually says, you get a position inside the church. I will talk to the Pope, I will provide you with a new position. And so he does. He actually goes to the Pope and says, can you give a good position to these people in the Rhineland, in northern Germany, in Pomerania, in Lübeck, and so on. And they all get good positions. And why did he do so? It could be that King Valdemar had some dark plan, or not dark plans, but he had some schemes. And these schemes were about regaining northern Estonia, because he had to hand over or forcibly sell northern Estonia to the Teutonic Order in 1346, but he wasn't quite satisfied with this, and he tried to regain some influence in Reval, or in northern Estonia, by actually taking the sons of important figures inside the territories of Livonia and help them along the way. This would actually not be far off what he did with the sons of important people in the Hanseatic towns at the time. He did so for several sons in Lübeck, in Wismar, in Schwerin, in Greifswald, and so on and so forth. So he actually may have used them to maybe gain some influence, gain some good positions, get some insider knowledge of the towns, from the towns, because he had actually helped the sons of important people. So, but it is also quite remarkable that all of these Estonian clerics that Valdemar actually provided as a new position didn't get any positions in Denmark. Just sent them to all kinds of bishoprics just around Denmark, but not to Denmark itself, which I don't know why. Maybe the Danish church opposed it, but I couldn't really find a reason why he did not use it in Denmark. So, and then there are the monk networks, the monastic networks. It seems that there have been quite extensive contacts between the Danish monasteries, or at least the monasteries of the Dominican province of Dacia, which is Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, with Estonia. Because we have the protocols from the Dominican province of Dacia from 1252 to 1254, 1275 to 1280, and from 1291. They are preserved. And the last source, and all these they mention, is that they micromanage who's going to which monastery. So people go from from Visby to Tallinn, and then again to Helsingborg within 3 years. And then again people go from Tallinn to Schleswig again, and again back within 5 years. And why is that? Why are they micromanaging so hard? Why are they moving people around all the time? I think this has to do because people have special skills, they have special knowledge because of education that they can get somewhere else, or eventually even if there are some conflicts at monasteries and people just don't get along, we just take one of the people who are causing the trouble and say, well, you leave the monastery and you go to the other end of the Baltic. Well, at least this is what I read out of the sources. At the beginning of the Danish involvement in Livonia, it was more or less like a privilege to actually get involved in the missionary work and actually spreading the word of Christ and actually become a monk on the outskirts of Christendom. And then that was in the 13th century, and in the 15th century it becomes not a privilege but a punishment. We have an example of a Danish monk who actually went to the Studium Generale in Naples. That caused some complaints, there was trouble, he left Italy without permission, and then he was immediately sent to Riva. Oh, the Danish monk did not like to be sent to Riva. He just read the note, okay, I have to go, I need to go to Italy. So he left his monastery in Denmark, rode across the Alps, met the provincial prior of Lombardia, and then said, please, excuse me, I don't want to do this. I'm sorry what I did, can I please be excused? And they let him off the hook. So he was allowed to go back to his home monastery, and well, it seems that he was quite happy to be in Italy, so he also get the approval to actually attend another meeting in Italy. So maybe he just liked the good weather, I don't know. It can be that he did not like the rain and the snow and so on, and he more liked the good weather, south of the Alps. Well, but I'm almost finished. Well, the last hurrah, I call it. And this is the story about Bishop John Blankenfeld of Riva. He was bishop of Reval in the early years of the 16th century, and he was sent to Denmark to be papal envoy at the royal wedding between King Christian II and his Habsburg bride, Elizabeth of Habsburg. And he was there sent to be the papal representative, but the wedding stalled. It took forever to get going, and delays, and eventually he just said, okay, I don't want to stay in Denmark anymore. Hey, you, Bishop of Roskilde, you take over the position of giving them the blessings from the Pope, and then we're good. And then he left Denmark, and this is where we leave the subject as well. But we have just these small instances that there is contact between Estonian clerics and Denmark, but this is not systematically. We don't have any systematic knowledge of what they are doing. We know that there is contact, and we can glimpse that there is more than that we know of, but nothing concise. And when I started out, the question of two Danish-Estonian interactions still remains, because are these clerics actually people born in Estonia, or are they people from a Danish, German, whatever upper class that actually have settled in Livonia at some point? And then we only just hear them move around, and we don't have any real Estonians involved in this, but only people who live in Estonia. So, my question was, were there actually any native Estonians enrolled in the Danish church? I suppose there are. And were they educated in Estonia? Or did they go back to Denmark to really get an education at a cathedral chapter and then go back? Or did they even go to France or to Italy, to the schools of Europe, and then go back to Estonia? What did they do? We don't know. And I was initially intrigued by a sentence in the conclusion of Tina Carr's article on the acceptance and rejection of Catholicism among the native inhabitants of medieval Livonia. She writes about the practice of taking hostages in order to reprieve the conquered people of the next generation of potential leaders. Wouldn't this have been a logical step to maybe take the children of the next generation of the potential leaders and induce them into the church, and then convert them to Catholicism, and then promote Christianity through that way, and even remove, because we have this idea of the Danish kings using others than the established elite as their representatives in Estonia. So maybe they remove the sons not by bloody murder or by just chopping their head off, but just by inducing them into the church, having to swear that they become chaste, they can't have children, and then further Christianity that way, and then be able to use people a little bit lower on the rung ladder. So it could be. The problem is just the sources of this are slightly lacking. I have been really struggling by this lack of source material. So I would just say, do you have any idea? Do you have any sources? Do you have any ideas how this happened? Because I have nothing else to say. And I thought, because instead of just ending it, I could just as well throw the questions out here and say, what does the audience say? Because I don't know. It's an interesting idea or theory or a hypothesis, but I can't prove it. So.
Yeah. Thank you, Stefan. Doing the unexpected and as asking questions from the audience. And now it's your turn. You don't have to answer him. Just ask your own questions.
Thanks a lot.
So I hope that you certainly should have questions. No?
Yeah, the problem is that there's nobody who has ever written on this, and I know actually why nobody ever wrote on this, because it's not much material. Tom.
Yeah, concerning the hostages, John Gillingham has written about taking hostage, mostly though about female victims of war. And there are, I think, in his articles, some references to other narrative sources that sort of tell us a little bit more about such a practice.
Because
I will start reading it, John's.
Because I was initially thinking about the missionary bishop Ansgar. When he first arrived in Scandinavia, he bought some slave boys to actually educate them into the church, and then have some people who actually were native and could speak the language, and this way actually become the priests of the next generation.
And as you well know, then there's a reference in Henry stating that the people were afraid of being sent to Germany.
Yeah.
And stuff like that. But you're right, it's clues, but nothing so.
Yeah, that is the problem. There's always just clues, but there's nothing substantial.
So Kurt has a question.
Yeah, that's much more a question. If this the former system continues after 1346, that the bishops are part of the Danish church, that must be somehow negotiated with the Teutonic Order. Because I mean, they could have got the natural thing would be to say, okay, we move you to Riga, under Riga, or under somebody else. Is this an indication? Do we have any sources about such negotiations? Is it an indication that this selling of Estonia was not an attempt to get rid of Estonia to just get some money, but it was an attempt to still keep a maybe not control, but a connection to Estonia by having these church organizations, and it was accepted by the Teutonic Order?
I think because I think Olof at the time was very much thinking about what would happen after Estonia, because he could already see that eventually it will end up with Estonia being sold to the Teutonic Order. So maybe this is why he actually was so complacent, and he said, okay, we accept that you actually have occupied the duchy because it was necessary, because it wasn't really necessary. There is an upcoming article by Mikkel in a book which states about the whole situation and so on. So I think he was very smart, because he knew if he opposed the Teutonic Order, then the Teutonic Order would just say, okay, we are now in control, we just ship you along. So, because he was as compliant as he was, he could just say, well, good, you can work with us, you can just stay, and then they could say they knew he was already quite, he wouldn't say old, but he was advanced in years. So he died in 1350, so he wouldn't be a long time. So they said, well, time will do its natural course, and then we put in our own candidate. I think that is why Olof was allowed to stay.
So I would just have a small comment, and then, or do you want to speak first? Yeah. So my comment was that at the time, in the middle of the 14th century, the relations between the Teutonic Order in Livonia and the Archbishop of Riga were at their worst. So I mean, they would have no interest in doing all this whole difficult situation of switching the bishopric from one Jewish province to another. It would make no sense for them at all. And you have to have a lot of, I would say, consensus for this. So the Archbishop of Lund has to consent to this, the Archbishop of Riga has to consent to this, and it takes a lot of work at the Curia.
Yeah.
So,
and why spend the time and effort with some bishop who will be dead within 5 years?
So, Antti Sela.
Maybe just short remark supports good, because later in several occasions. There was a dispute between the King of Denmark and the Trony border, who has the right to appoint the Bishop of Tallinn, because it was in very non-canonical way, quite often appointed, not elected. And several times the claim of the Danish king was that we did not sell our right to appoint the Bishop of Tallinn.
It gets even worse. The Danes claim that the whole of the deal was illegal. They repeatedly take it up in the 16th century.
It's another story, but
it was more or less like the Tutoring Order broke Valdemar's arm and said, well, you sell this because you owe us money. And King Valdemar said, okay, I can't really fight it because this costs a lot of money and effort, and I have my kingdom to take care of, so I just have to consent to giving Estonia up, but I will be back. And he tried several times.
Because you mean that the church organization was used as an argument later that the whole deal.
But in several cases when the new bishop was appointed, this topic was mentioned, and really, although the bishopric of Tallinn was never incorporated into the Teutonic Order, like the Boromir or Russian, or in several times Riga, the Teutonic Order really, after the mid-14th century, had a great impact on the person of the Bishop of Tallinn. And another maybe detail, it's not very well known, but the Estonian historian and archaeologist Artur Vassar in some 1970s published a short notice that maybe Vesselin was Estonian.
Oh, that's actually interesting.
It's not very convincing, but still.
No, but it should at least be mentioned. Oh, I did not know that. That is quite good. Quite interesting. But we don't know. The problem is also when Fulko first was sent to Estonia by the Danish Archbishop, he was given an Estonian monk from Norway to accompany him because he knew the language. So he would have an easier time actually convincing some Estonians about the Christian God and so on and everything. So that must mean there must have been Estonians actually embracing Christianity before Valdemar II actually arrived here and so on. But we don't know how many and how early and so on. But as we know in Ribe in Denmark, we have this cemetery which is from the 9th century? From the 9th century, where they have a lot of Christian graves. So basically, Christianity only was officially adopted in Denmark 150 years later, but they were already slightly moving into Denmark, and actually people were convinced becoming Christian. It could be of all kinds of reasons, because of true faith, but it could also be it's good for business. And this is most likely a good explanation. Because if you're Christian, then you will be able to come to Christian trading places and so on, will be easily accepted, easier to earn money. And then, this is how this always works.
Monica.
So, I don't know if it's directly your interest, but I have during the last years been dealing actually with the archaeological side of the Christianization, namely in Northern Estonia and Saaremaa. And one thing, yes, we have some first reference actually, some burials which look like Christian already before the Christianization. But what I wanted to mention was that when I was, there's a number of what we used to call village cemeteries, but they are not the same as in inland Estonia. They are kind of different. They are almost entirely the 13th century. And several of them, there are some dating problems because this scientific analysis were not very widespread because of high price. Now it's getting very quickly better. And it seems that quite a number of these cemeteries have been dated, not like according to the artifacts, a little bit too early. They are the 13th century. That is a Christian period. And it is just ongoing research. That's why I hesitate so much. But when I went through the ones we know, then I noticed like their location on the cultural landscape. So they are neither, okay, some of them are near the churches, of course, but then quite a number of them, almost, I think, 2/3 at least, are more or less next to some manors. So they are not like a bit further away from the manor, but they are like next to the building, more or less, or where the building used to be. The buildings they traveled in the course of time, but it's the center. And then I was namely drawing parallels with Denmark and about how the church
buildings
structure developed, and I see a very clear parallel to like the same, like the private churches where the private ones, the owners were owners of the manor house, whatever, the land were buried, and then of course the others of bishop and so on and so on. But these burials I'm now mentioning, they are very clearly Estonian. I mean, they are rich burials, so to say. Lots of artifacts, very local ones, and came to be next to these manors that we, at least from the later period, know that they had some central role. So, according to cultural landscape, central places. Local central places, of course.
So this would mean, like in Denmark, it would be the upper class has adopted Christianity first, maybe, and then the people that are associated with the nobility or the higher class or the upper classes, they get involved as well, and then it slightly started spreading outwards. So Christianity wasn't okay. King Harald Brutus is baptized, and now every Dane is Christian. No, it did not happen this way. We know that there were still pagans in Denmark in early 12th century. In the inland of Blekinge and in the outskirts of Blekinge, there were still some pagans. So Christianity, it took a couple of 100 years to actually get through the entire society and all kinds of people. So,
but these cemeteries disappear after 150 years, and that is actually also the same when the party parish system was established and that stabilized, that kind of private church disappears.
And the parish system in Denmark is from the 12th century or some 11th century, early 12th century. Then we have established more or less like, okay, this is a parish, you have a church, and then they start during the 11th century or the 12th century, they start building stone churches as well. So,
the last book, there they take a point of view that it had happened by the end of the 30th century. I can't recall the name of the author. Some double surname, Kiefer. This is a very big book, everyone. But of course, it's his opinion. I don't know, but I read the parallels.
So, Tina had a question as well.
Actually, it was not a question, but as Johnny Jakobsen is not here, I feel I have to step in for the Dominicans.
yes.
You certainly know that it was a usual practice within the order to send friars from one to another. But sometimes we really do get an impression that Tallinn was a kind of place on the margin of the territory of the order, on the margin of the Scandinavian province. But it did not work always in this way that friars were sent to Tallinn as if for punishment.
No, it is only in the later Middle Ages. It is not during the High Middle Ages, but in the later Middle Ages we have a few examples. That is why I use them here, because at that time they used that also as punishment for Estonia being a place of.
But what I wanted to say is that this is not a clear tendency, because we have quite a host of examples from the later Middle Ages. For example, in the early 1520s or around 1510s, I don't remember exactly the date, there was a friar in the Tallinn convent who was sent to Germany because he was intolerable.
He was what?
Intolerable.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
So
well, this is.
I think it depended on current circumstances, which was the best punishment for those intolerable, right?
Then we have to add that one of the hospitallers prior was sent as punishment to Riga in the 15th century, and then he escaped because there was so much smoke from the saunas in Riga.
Well, Riga was an international trading town, so you could just get a boat and then ship off to the Netherlands. Why not?
To Sweden.
Yeah.
Yes, I have this question about Fulko. Do you really have something to prove that he was really in Estonia, or is it just a wild guess from historiography?
That he was in Estonia.
Yeah, something to prove it.
According to one of your colleagues, there is a single source that actually states that he went to work among the people he was supposed to be a bishop of. So that is one of the papal letters says, but most of the letters are actually quite. They state that he was supposed to go to Estonia, but we don't know how. That is why I slightly said, well, we don't know how long he went there, what results he actually managed to do, but I wouldn't exclude the possibility that he actually went to Estonia, but he did not do that much. So this is to be diplomatic, because we know that he ended up back in France in the monastery where he started out from, and he did not want to go back. So maybe he just went off the boat, stayed here for a fortnight, and then he decided, okay, this is quite dangerous, and I don't like it here. This is uncivilized, and what have I done? Please take me home. And then he left. We don't know. Because then he could actually write to the Pope, well, I've been to Estonia and I've worked there and so on. He doesn't state how long he did that, but he was there. And then he had done his job, and then he could skip off back to his French monastery and drink wine and have a good time.
Basically, we don't know whether he actually left France in the first place.
It's doubtful, but I won't exclude the possibility. That is because I want to be as diplomatic as I can. Good.
I started thinking about parallel to the discussion this morning about they promised to go on a crusade, they promised and they never do. And I don't think it's because they didn't want, it doesn't make sense with all this preparation. So I suppose it must be, or we could imagine a parallel situation with these missionaries and early bishops and whatever. It is not that they came to Estonia and said, oh, it's too cold and go back. I suppose it doesn't make sense unless they have been really occupied, taken by the idea of becoming missionaries, becoming martyrs and whatever. They wanted to go. And then in a lot of cases, it was not possible, and we don't know why. I mean, this it's so difficult to grasp the motivations of these individuals, but what we do have of sources about the motivations all say that they wanted to go, they wanted to be killed. So in the sense, it was not that they were asked to and then they were forced to. I suppose most of the reason was actually very much driven by people who wanted to.
Well, we have a number of letters which actually state of the bishop, the abbot of the French monastery, and Eskil of Lund, and they all say to all the other dioceses he wants the help from the Danish bishoprics and all the Danish Christians and so on. And every time if he comes along and he wants your help, please help him. So actually they wanted to provide him with all the resources, and apparently he could not get the resources, or maybe he when he was finished for the year, then the autumn storms had begun and he couldn't set out, and then he was back and he didn't want to wait in Denmark, so he went back to France, and then the next year he had to start over, and then we don't know.
So Antti had another question.
As far as I know, the hypothesis that Fulko really was in Estonia is funded by Peter Rebane, exiled Estonia, who worked in United States.
Yeah.
And its basis on Reinga of a paper letter was cruelty of pagans is mentioned. And his idea was that this goes back to some personal experience of Fulko, but as you know, it's just a topos as well, so it actually doesn't say anything.
No, it's just...
Actually, you could argue the other way around, saying that if he actually went to Estonia, he might, and return because of the weather or whatever you suggested. That would be a prime subject for Henry, of course.
Yes.
And he would, had he known that story, he would have told us about it. You know, there was this Danish missionary, he didn't want to go, he didn't want to stay, so off with him. Here's the right one.
But
I, as an historian, would like to do that if I was.
But I think if Fulko had been appointed, he set out and then he got cold feet and left Estonia again after the fortnight. Then I think Eskil would have, or the bishop, the abbot in France, they would have found another monk and actually said, okay, who wants to go? And they don't do that. So Fulko seems to have been the man who was supposed to be it, and he did what he at least had the intentions to go, but couldn't go or whatever. But he did. There's no mention of a successor to Fulko or a replacement. And if I were Eskil or somebody else interested in converting in mission in Estonia, I would say, well, okay, the first monk we picked wasn't a good one. Let's pick another one, because you have enough people who actually are interested in going. So why don't we pick somebody else?
I just have a comment about, because I just remember this, that Albert Suerberg, who was a papal legate to Prussia, Livonia and Russia, and never went there personally. He did all his legate business in Germany and in Denmark, I think also. So yeah, so this is an example from the 1240s.
Yeah.
So could mean that you have the same thing in the 12th century.
And he certainly wanted to go.
Yeah, but he finally managed to go there.
Circumstances just happened in this way, and he had no possibility.
Yeah.
I mean, he went to Riga, I think, only because he was driven out from Lübeck by the king of the king of the Romans, who wanted to put his own supporter, so his own protégé, as Bishop of Lübeck.
And there was a vacancy in Riga.
And there was a vacancy in Riga.
Because it was the first Livonian Russian bishop to die, it was Nicholas of Riga, and it was just open place for new bishop maybe. Otherwise we would have the Archbishop of Koptakot maybe.
Oh yeah, or some other place, yeah. Or Koronia. So
I think, what is it now?
we still have 5 minutes to the coffee break, so we can either end discussion or and Arnold.
It's still out of discussion, but I have a question to all the ladies actually. I'm a former museum worker, so that's the idea behind it. There is a church bell from the Cathedral of Brasilia in Oslo, which is now located in Växjö Church in Denmark. Any chance of it back?
I have no personal objections to giving it back, but I think you will have to take it up with the Danish ambassador, and she is no longer here. But
you could make a copy and keep the copy.
Which church was it? The Danish.
Växjö is in Sweden.
In Denmark.
Some 20 kilometers from Copenhagen, I just looked that up.
Okay.
Let's have the name of the address and then we will do something else.
So, are there other questions? Or did we end it with the discussion on Växjö?
How did he come to Denmark? The usual way stealing it or?
Probably going to Livonian War in the
Yeah, it is.
16th century.
It was property of Magnus.
Yeah.
Actually, they distinguish or.
Okay.
Okay.
So if there are not any more questions, I would like everybody to do applause to the audience for the discussion.